Welcome to the deep dive. We've been digging through a whole stack of stuff here, articles, research notes, and honestly, it reveals this trend we just had to talk about.
Yeah, it's really striking.
It's about young American men, and what these sources are suggesting is, well, a pretty surprising shift in how interested they are in sex and relationships.
Mhm.
Our mission today is basically to pull out the key insights from all this material, try and understand the why behind it all.
And it's a trend that really jumps out from the research, doesn't it? I mean, the headline statistic is kind of remarkable. We're seeing numbers suggesting over 60% of young men today, well, they just aren't that interested in sex.
The 60%, that number just on its own, it makes you stop and think. And what we've been reading makes it clear this isn't just about straight guys, right?
Not at all. No, it includes LGBTQ plus young men too. And the sources show young men are like twice as likely as young women to be single, to identify as asexual, and, well, even lonely.
It's a really significant data point.
It really suggests something bigger is changing, on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Actually, some of the material we looked at, it draws this parallel between now, the 2020s, and the 1960s.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, they suggest that if the 60s brought the sexual revolution, maybe what we're seeing now is something like an asexual revolution.
Huh. An asexual revolution.
That's
Definitely flips the usual cultural script, doesn't it? The research even mentions ace is sort of emerging as a label.
Exactly. A new way for people to identify if they just find sex unappealing, or even, as one source put it, kind of gross.
Right. And this isn't just like individuals finding their own way or struggling to find partners necessarily.
No, that's a key point. If you look at the bigger picture, overall sexual activity in America, it's actually at a 30-year low.
30 years. Wow.
Yeah. And for young adults specifically, 18 to 30, it's even lower. About 28% reported having no sex at all last year.
28%. And it's interesting you said it's not just about people failing to connect.
Right. The data we look at indicates about 57% of single adults aren't even really trying to date or hook up.
57% aren't even looking.
Apparently not. And only a small fraction, something like 13%, are in serious relationships.
So what the sources are suggesting is maybe a broader decline in just interest in close relationships, not just sex.
That seems to be the implication. That connection itself, at least in those traditional romantic or sexual ways, it's maybe less of a priority for a big chunk of this group.
Okay, right. Let's try and unpack the why then. What kind of factors does the research point to? What might be contributing?
Well, there's several different angles that come up in the sources. One really practical thing is just where young adults are living.
Okay.
Around half of young adults are living at home with their parents. And you can imagine, right, trying to bring someone home for, romantic evening, maybe a bit awkward with mom and dad just down the hall.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly scream romance, does it? Okay, so living arrangements, that makes sense. What about technology? Dating apps must come into this.
Oh, absolutely. The research definitely points to dating apps, like Tinder. About 62% of single men say they use them regularly.
Okay, that's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
But here's the twist. Even though they promise easy connections, some sources argue these apps might actually be, well, killing romance.
Killing romance. What's the dynamic there?
Well, the way it's described for women, the experience is often just this flood of messages, a huge number of available guys, and sometimes, well...
Sometimes strange guys.
Yeah, that's mentioned. And the profiles themselves. The sources get pretty specific about the types of photos guys often use.
Oh, I think I know these. The classic awkward profile pics.
Exactly. Mention is made of things like bed selfies or the classic shirtless gym mirror shot.
Yeah.
And the framing in the source is that these are guys trying to show off, but often in these kind of awkward ways, maybe hoping for a quick coffee date. One author kind of dryly noted it could make you question the future of dating altogether.
Okay, yeah, that paints a pretty vivid picture of the digital dating scene. Let's shift gears a bit. What about identity, the whole evolving understanding of identity? Does that play a role according to the sources?
It does come up, yeah. One perspective that's raised is that the increased visibility and acceptance of all these different sexual and gender identities, while it's obviously a positive thing for inclusivity, it can feel overwhelming to some people trying to navigate the dating world.
How so?
The phrasing one source used was about sort of struggling to keep up with all the terms like LGBTQIA++R, and feeling like you're facing this huge menu of identities when you're single and trying to figure things out.
So it's presented as potentially confusing for some.
Yeah, just how it can feel to some people navigating the scene. It's not presented as a judgment on the identities themselves. Just another layer of complexity, maybe.
Right. So it's not just finding someone you click with, but maybe also navigating this complex landscape of understanding yourself and potential partners, too.
Exactly. And stepping back for a more expert view, the research mentions Debbie Herbenick at Indiana University. She studies sex scientifically.
Okay. And what does her work show?
Well, her research confirms this drop in sexual activity across the board, not just for young men.
And does she pinpoint a cause?
The material suggests her view is that there's no single reason. It's more like a mix of factors coming together.
A confluence.
Yeah. And she also just makes the point that sex and dating today are fundamentally different experiences compared to, say, the 1960s, which actually brings us to a factor that gets a lot of emphasis in the research we looked at:
Okay, what's that?
the role of online porn.
Ah, yes. The elephant in the room for a lot of these discussions. The sources really focus on this, huh?
They really do present it as a major influence. I mean, the stats they cite are pretty eye-opening. Something like 12% of all websites are porn sites.
12%. That's huge.
It is. And one claim that really stands out is that 98% of men watch porn, with the author adding, a bit cheekily, that the other 2% probably aren't being honest.
98%. Wow. Okay, so that's near universal exposure. How does the research suggest this impacts young men's interest in, real-world sex?
Well, the perspective presented is that for a lot of young guys, porn becomes their main, maybe even their only, source for understanding sex.
Hmm.
The analogy used is it's like trying to learn how to drive by only watching like Formula One racing.
Ah, okay. High speed, extreme, not like daily driving.
Exactly. It's presented as totally unrealistic compared to everyday experience.
Mhm.
And the content itself. The sources describe it as increasingly extreme.
Extreme in what way?
Risky acts, unrealistic scenarios, and often quite violent acts are depicted frequently. They give examples, contrasting these sort of fantasy scenarios like, I don't know, two women in bikinis fixing your cable, with really disturbing findings from other studies. Well, one study cited found that 58% of female college students reported being choked during sex, which is presented alongside these porn statistics.
Wow. That's a really shocking comparison the sources draw there.
It really highlights this potential disconnect between the fantasy world of porn and, well, healthy real-world interactions. And the research also points out just how easy it is to access now.
Right. It's everywhere.
Instantly available. Phone, tablet, laptop, anytime, anywhere. And the average viewing time is apparently only about 9 minutes. Quick hits.
Okay, so you've got years of exposure to this extreme, super accessible content. What does the research argue the effect is on actual real-life sex?
The core argument put forward is that seeing years and years of this kind of extreme, often violent, hyper-stimulating stuff, it makes real-world sexual encounters feel, well, dull. Boring, even.
Dull.
Yeah. The analogy one source used was that real sex then feels like racing at 35 miles per hour with turn signals boring.
That's a pretty stark analogy. It certainly gets the point across from that perspective. And this isn't just a psychological thing, right? The sources link it to physical issues, too, specifically erectile dysfunction.
That's right. The material makes a strong argument connecting porn use to ED in young men. They cite data showing that 26% of men under 40 have experienced erectile dysfunction.
26%. A quarter of young men facing ED. That feels like a really significant number.
It really does. And the material connects this to the rise of certain businesses, too.
Oh, like what?
Well, it points to companies like Roman, the one that mails ED drugs directly to people. They're presented as these huge successes, valued at over $7 billion just a few years after starting up in 2017.
And the implication is that this boom reflects a real need.
That's how it's framed, that this rapid growth is kind of further evidence that ED is becoming a more widespread issue, especially among younger guys.
It's important, though, to be clear, the sources don't say porn is the only cause for ED or the only reason for lack of interest, do they?
No, absolutely not. That's a crucial nuance they make sure to include. The material definitely acknowledges other contributing factors. Things like antidepressants, stress, performance anxiety, underlying health issues.
Right.
So while porn gets a lot of focus as a factor, it's definitely presented as part of a much more complex picture.
Okay. So if we try and pull all this together, the research we've been looking at, it really paints this picture of a complicated trend. No single, simple answer.
Absolutely not. What we've reviewed points to this whole mix of things. Social factors like, living situations, big technological shifts with dating apps and how easy porn is to get, and even these health implications like ED. It's really multi-layered.
Which brings us back to you, the listener. Why does digging into this trend matter for you? What do these insights actually give you?
Well, I think understanding this shift, this potential decline in interest among young men, based on what the research suggests,
Right.
it gives you really vital perspective on some major things changing in modern society. It helps you see how relationships and the idea of connection might be evolving, how technology is really deeply impacting how we interact. And it just gives you a deeper understanding of what life is like for a huge group of people today. It's about seeing some of these big underlying shifts happening around us.
Kind of helps you look past the headlines and see the dynamics underneath.
Exactly. And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into these sources, they definitely leave you with a lot to think about. Like we said, there's no single easy answer for why young men's interest in sex and relationships might be declining, according to this material.
And one of the authors we read, they ended with a particularly provocative question, didn't they?
They did, yeah. It was
Yeah.
basically questioning why. Why? If we have these public discussions about the potential harms of social media, like TikTok, maybe even talk about regulating or banning them, why don't we have a similar public conversation about regulating porn?
Especially given the potential harms the research suggests it might be having on young people.
Right. It really just leaves you, the listener, to sort of ponder the bigger societal implications of all this. How do we weigh these different factors against each other? And maybe what kind of conversation should we be having next?